I knew they'd never notice the fire alarm I rigged into the vendor escalation chain until it was already screaming. But that was the point. I didn't build that company's controls so someone could slap their name on a spreadsheet and take credit. I built them to not break when the clowns showed up. 5 years of my life, and they still thought the compliance system just grew on trees. Know how some people decorate their cubicles with cat calendars and glitter pens? I had binders, labeled, tabbed, cross-referenced like the Library of Congress for corporate liability. Vendor risk logs, whistleblower intake routing, attestation tiers with automatic dual signer escalation if someone tried to get clever. My boss once joked I could audit the IRS. But when bonuses cleared and stock buybacks went smooth, no one looked twice at the woman behind the firewall. That was fine, I preferred it. Invisible meant protected, unless you were the system. Then you knew my fingerprints were everywhere, not just in the interface, but in the architecture. There was a day, 2 years back, when the board was approving a list of policy updates. It was a sleepy offsite, some vineyard, or whatever. I remember the CFO looked sunburned and the Wi-Fi kept dropping. I slipped clause 12e into the stack, fallback countersignature protocol. Triggerable only in unanticipated transitional events. Meaning, if someone got canned, quit, or was streamlined, the entire Tier 1 compliance tree locked down until a secondary signer, me, confirmed the handover. They passed it without reading. They always did, buried in a PDF, right after the anti-money laundering language and before the annual mileage reimbursement rates. I made sure it was technically boring, kind of thing only someone like me would notice. And I made sure it was airtight, legal signed, time-stamped, logged, because I knew someday someone was going to walk into that office with a smirk, a whiteboard, and a dream of optimization. And when they did, I didn't want to fight. I wanted leverage. If you're already hooked, take a second to tap that subscribe and like button. Not because I need the numbers, because the team spends an ungodly amount of coffee and brain cells keeping stories like this sharp, real, and just twisted enough to make your next HR meeting feel educational. Anyway, Elizabeth, that's me, 42, quiet, not quite invisible. Just smart enough to know that if you're the last person standing between your company and a federal audit, you better make sure nobody can erase you with a memo. Most folks assumed my role was something like senior compliance officer. Not wrong, but not the whole truth. I didn't just build the system. I was the system. They handed me a mess of spreadsheets, post-it notes, and standard ops 4 years out of date, and I turned it into a closed-loop compliance fortress. You couldn't file a vendor payment over $50K without a routing path I hadn't vetted. Couldn't change a department policy without triggering my notification bot. Even HR had to get my sign-off on anything involving international hires. I never made noise. I never got into office politics. When they gave out awards, I stayed home and wrote automated exception handlers. It wasn't about credit, it was about precision. Risk doesn't care about ego, and neither did I. But over time, something shifted. I started noticing things in the hallway. First came the new faces. Board-hired consultants with LinkedIn buzzwords and lanyards that screamed, "I've never filed a vendor audit in my life." Then the whispered phrases, "We're too slow, need to modernize, redundant layers." One day, I walked past the war room and saw the COO pointing at a flowchart I'd made 2 years ago. Only now, it had giant red X's across every control node with my initials. I didn't panic. Backed up everything, twice. Made sure the backups were air-gapped, clean, and stored where they'd never think to look, because they wouldn't even know what to look for. I also did one last thing. I ran a trigger test on clause 12e, just to make sure it still worked. The logs came back clean, time-stamped, board-approved, still irrevocable unless overturned by unanimous board vote. No loopholes, no sunset clause, and no idea what was coming for them. Strutted in like he'd just solved corporate fraud with a standing desk and a motivational podcast. New coup, maybe 35 on a generous day, all veneers and buzzwords. The kind of guy who thinks synergy is a personality trait. First week, and he's already rearranging entire departments like it's a game of Risk. The morning it happened, I knew something was off. My calendar had a last-minute meeting titled HR Realignment Discussion Urgent. That's the kind of phrase that makes your coffee curdle. I walked past 3 desks being vacated and a whiteboard covered in arrows, bullet points, and a flowchart that looked suspiciously like a murder scene for middle management. I didn't bring a notebook, didn't need one. They were waiting for me in conference room B, him and the HR director, Cheryl, who looked like she'd aged 10 years since the new regime started. She wouldn't make eye contact. It's how you know it's already been decided. He grinned when I walked in. "Elizabeth, please sit. No handshake, no pleasantries. Just that corporate predator smile like a man who's read half of The Art of War and thinks Sun Tzu worked in logistics." "I'll get straight to it," he said, lacing his fingers together like he was about to offer me a timeshare. "We're consolidating redundancies, streamlining, building agility." I didn't blink. He continued, and unfortunately, a role, while valuable in its time, is part of a legacy structure we're moving away from. He said it like he was offering me a casserole. HR slid a bland manila folder across the table. Severance, NDA, waiver of claims, all the hits. And then he smiled wider. "No hard feelings, sweetheart, it's just business." That was his mistake. I reached into my bag. No theatrics, no speech. Just a sealed white envelope, labeled in my careful handwriting, "Formal Trigger Notice Clause 12E." I slid it across the table like a poker chip made of thermite. He glanced at it like I'd handed him a Sudoku puzzle. "What's this?" I met his eyes, finally. "Operational Continuity Clause, effective immediately." Cheryl's face went pale. She knew. She remembered. The COO looked at her, confused. "Is this something I need to sign?" She didn't answer. She was already reading the envelope like it was a confession note left on a crime scene. I stood. He smirked. "You sure you don't want to say anything else before you go?" I smiled, small, tight. "You'll understand it better by 9:01. Then I walked out. No tears, no raised voice. I didn't even take the stapler they gave me for my 5-year anniversary. Just left the room and headed straight to the parking garage. That moment, look on his face as he tried to decide whether I was bluffing or unwell, wasn't triumph. It was vindication. Because the system he thought he was inheriting wasn't just paperwork and protocols. It was mine. And the moment that envelope was opened, he'd unknowingly activated a process that made him about as useful as a Wi-Fi router in a microwave. Clause 12E wasn't a memo. It wasn't an idea. It was code. Code that rewrote access pathways, flagged signatory dependencies, and relocked anything labeled Tier 1 compliance under a dual auth chain. My name, my key, my terms, and the beauty of it, he couldn't turn it off, because turning it off required board approval, unanimous board approval, and nobody had read the clause when they voted. Back in my car, I connected to the secure portal from my phone. The log showed green, trigger accepted, chain rekeyed, legacy signer override engaged. 3 lines, that's all it took. By the time I backed out of the garage, Cheryl had called legal. I know this because the automated alert pinged my proxy inbox. Legal exception request at a station override. Denied. The system didn't recognize the COO, because, technically, as of that morning, he wasn't cleared. He was just a man in a suit with a revoked pass and a smug little smirk that was already starting to fade. I got home around 11:12 a.m., still dressed like someone with a job. The weird part wasn't the quiet. It was the clean break. No goodbye email. No farewell cupcakes. No fake applause from people who thought compliance was just a checkbox between lunch and happy hour. Just me, a half-finished cup of coffee, and 5 years of unspoken leverage sitting on a kitchen counter. I took off my badge and set it down like a dead SIM card. No ceremony, just gravity. I opened my laptop and logged into the control panel. The audit system greeted me like an old friend. "Welcome, ER, Linton. Admin override enabled." I went straight to the attestation controls. 5 tabs, 3 toggles, 1 final field, countersigner activation status, dormant. I clicked enable. The screen blinked once. Then the message changed. Tier 1 compliance. Dual signature mode engaged, fallback signatory, ER. Linton irrevocable, 12E simple. Quiet, no fireworks. Just a small cascade of interlinked scripts I'd written back when I still believed in future-proofing for idiots. Every time a Tier 1 attestation was attempted, from vendor risk filings to internal audit validations, the system would now look for my confirmation. No signature, no progress. And no one, not legal, not IT, not even the damn CEO, would bypass it without completing a 3-step revocation process that required a formal board vote, unanimous consent, my digital signature confirming release of role, good luck with that. But I wasn't finished. I pulled up my admin profile and began dismantling it. Not my access, just my presence. Disabled primary console login. Archived internal credentials. Reassigned non-critical routing approvals to department heads. Flushed VPN tokens. Scrubbed Slack logs. I even deleted my internal Zoom account. Not because I had to, because I wanted them to feel the silence. By the time I was done, I was a ghost in the machine, except for the one place that mattered, the attestation core, and that wasn't an account, that was architecture. Clause 12e had embedded my ID directly into the protocol layer of the system during the rewrite 2 years ago. Not as an admin, not as an employee, as a condition. Like oxygen, like gravity. You don't log into gravity. And here's the kicker. When they signed off on the clause, they hard-coded my role as the fallback. That wasn't my doing. That was legal's lazy boilerplate. I just didn't fix it. And now their house-cleaning messiah was about to find out what happens when you fire the locksmith without checking who wrote the building's fire code. I closed the laptop. No smug grin, no glass of wine. Just that strange, clinical peace you get after surgery. Cold hands, clear mind. Out there in that office, they thought I was gone, an obsolete middle manager they could scrub from the directory. And technically, I was. No email, no badge, no chair, but in the guts of their compliance infrastructure, I was a permanent condition. The quiet lock had clicked shut, the kind you don't hear until you try the door and realize you're never getting back in. The first cracks showed up on a Tuesday, 2 weeks before the audit deadline. Just little things. A vendor report wouldn't validate. A compliance form showed up with a red border instead of green. The kind of glitches most people wave off with a shrug and a help desk ticket. But this wasn't IT being slow. This was friction, calculated, coded friction. The new COO, his name was Mason, by the way, because of course it was, decided that senior leadership needs to stop hand-holding operations. We handed the entire audit prep workload to 2 junior analysts fresh out of onboarding. Nice kids. One still had his university lanyard hanging from his backpack. The other used Comic Sans in internal Slack messages. I don't blame them. Mason, though, he was thrilled. Thought he was proving some grand theory about decentralization. If our systems are good, anyone should be able to run point, he told the CFO. Over-leveraged on tribal knowledge. It's inefficient. That was the kind of phrase he loved to use. Over-leveraged on tribal knowledge. Translation. I fired the only person who knew how the engine worked, but I think I can steer with YouTube tutorials and vibes. Day 1 of audit prep, legal pinged the junior team with a simple ask. Where are the countersigned vendor compliance forms for Q3? They couldn't find them. Day 2, procurement noticed their third-party risk tiering hadn't been updated in the dashboard. The forms had been submitted. The data was clean, but the status read, pending countersigner confirmation, ERL. One of the juniors flagged it in the weekly thread. Mason responded with a thumbs-up emoji and wrote, "Ignore that, just a legacy tag. She's been offboarded." IT was less confident. One of their engineers, Lewis, I think, dug into the access logs and posted this gem to the internal compliance Slack. Not a tag. Protocols hard-coded. Attempts to bypass escalate to legal ops and trigger failsafes. Mason replied in under 10 seconds, "It's a naming error. Fix it or escalate to CIO." Not a blocker. And there it was. Dismissiveness in its purest form, kind that doesn't understand the difference between a permissions checkbox and a non-revocable protocol condition approved by the board. HR chimed in later that afternoon, asking why their internal audit forms for international hires hadn't cleared review. Same red warning box. Tier 1 attestation incomplete countersigner required, ERL. Mason literally laughed in the meeting. Okay, this is getting silly. Just delete the user profile. So they tried. IT went in and pulled up my old admin account. Deactivated, archived, properly offboarded. They searched for ERL in the user directory. Nothing. They tried to manually reassign the countersigner fields to someone else. Denied. They contacted the vendor who provided the audit platform. The vendor replied, and I quote, "Sorry, this field is not account-based. It's condition-based. Your fallback signer is embedded in the logic layer. Moval requires formal policy reversal, per your board-approved governance document dated July 12th, 2 years ago." One of the junior analysts asked the question no one else wanted to say out loud. Wait, is she still technically the only one who can unlock these? Mason rolled his eyes and said, of course not. She's gone, deleted. We control the system now. Except they didn't, because deleting a profile isn't the same as revoking authority. And Mason, God bless his haircut and misplaced confidence, didn't realize that Clause 12e didn't give me access. It gave me authority. That's not something you clear with a click. That's something you petition to the board to revoke. And if you don't do it, every Tier 1 process tied to risk, compliance, or audit just waits. It doesn't throw a tantrum. It doesn't crash. It just freezes. Quietly. Elegantly. A smart bomb waits for the exact pressure trigger before it ends your afternoon. 1 week out from audit day, and the panic started to smell like burnt toner and cold sweat. The juniors were already cracking. One had started coming in an hour early, unprompted, just to cross-reference compliance logs with coffee-stained spreadsheets. The other stopped using emojis entirely. That's how you know things were unraveling. It started with a simple validation failure, quarterly attestation packet, standard stuff, vendor compliance forms, SOC2 confirmation, third-party risk matrix, refused to finalize. The system flagged it with a message no one wanted to read. Finalization blocked. Tier 1 signature incomplete fallback signatory, not confirmed. Legal noticed first. They pinged Mason's office with a curt email titled Red Flag Unvalidated Tier 1 Filings. Mason, still running on pure hubris and Lacroix, called a stand-up and told IT, just reassign the damn fallback signer. Give it to Cheryl in HR, or hell, put my name in. This isn't rocket science. IT just stared. Lewis, poor patient Lewis, said, sir, it's not an account permission. The fallback isn't stored in the user directory. It's embedded in the compliance protocol. The only way to override is through a full transition package. Mason blinked. Build the transition package. Lewis hesitated. It's not built, it's requested. You can't generate one unless the current fallback signer relinquishes the role or the board formally votes to reassign. Mason started pacing. Okay, then get legal to draft the reassignment vote. Let's move. Legal responded in 4 lines. As per Clause 12e, fallback signatory reassignment requires unanimous board approval and co-signature from current fallback. ER. Attempting to override protocol may constitute breach of governance controls. Breached, that word. It hung there like mold on drywall. At that point, Mason's confidence started to chip. Not break, not yet, but crack, yes. His voice got quieter. He stopped saying streamline every 5 minutes. You could hear the gears grinding in his head, trying to rationalize a system he thought was a whiteboard diagram, not a living organism with teeth. Next morning, they tried brute force. IT spun up a sandbox environment and tried to clone the protocol instance minus the fallback logic. Result: validation chain failure missing tier 1 authority anchor translation. Nice try. Now go ask the grown-up who wrote it. Lewis pulled Mason into a side call. Closed door. No juniors. No legal. What happened in there wasn't recorded, but Mason came out pale. Not scared. Not angry. Just blinking like he'd realized the steering wheel wasn't attached to the car. That afternoon, Cheryl from HR sent a reminder about the audit date. Polite, chipper, useless. Legal sent another note. This one flagged high priority. 3 critical attestations blocked. External auditor requires pre-validation by Friday. We are not on track. That's when Mason lost it. He stormed into IT with 6 binders under his arm. Barking about rogue code and legacy lockdowns like this was some backwater startup running on borrowed code from GitHub. The man actually said, "There's no way a former employee should be able to freeze us out like this." Lewis didn't even blink. With respect, sir, she didn't freeze us out. She just never handed you the key. Later that night, I checked the system logs from my secure portal. The attempt counter for policy overrides had spiked. 12 tries in 24 hours. I sat back, sipping my tea, watching the alerts roll in like tides. Protocol intact, trigger engaged. Escalation paths looping endlessly back to one name, ER. Linton, their fuse was lit. Audit day was coming, and all they had to do was ask, politely, publicly. In front of a boardroom full of people who now had to ask themselves, who the hell did we just fire? 3 days to audit. That's when Mason brought in the contractor. You know the type. Dressed in the black turtleneck version of cybersecurity, clean-shaven, 0 personality, laptop covered in cryptic stickers like zero trust and root or die. Walked in like he was about to hack the Pentagon from a conference room with bad Wi-Fi and a box of Panera. Mason introduced him as our systems optimization consultant, which is exec speak for. I found a freelancer on LinkedIn who claims he once did something for Deloitte. The contractor nodded to the IT team like a surgeon greeting his nurses. He asked for full architecture access, root credentials, and a code walkthrough of the attestation engine. Lewis handed him a sanitized schematic and a polite warning. Just so you know, the fallback signer logic isn't stored in a variable. It's hardwired. The contractor didn't even look up. Everything's just logic. Give me an hour. At 11:42 a.m., the first patch attempt failed. At 11:43, the second was rejected and flagged. At 11:45, the system locked his admin session and returned a bright red message across the console: unauthorized attempt to modify compliance architecture. Fallback signer, ER, Linton. Status, irrevocable without board consent. Incident logged. Incident logged. That meant legal got a copy. Did the vendor? So did every compliance auditor tied to the integration. The contractor sat very still. No more bravado. Just one long stare at the monitor like it had insulted his ancestors. Lewis leaned over. Told you it was hardwired. Mason paced like a man auditioning for a nervous breakdown. So there's no way to bypass this. The contractor shrugged. I could maybe spoof a dummy environment and swap DNS pointers. That'll trip the vendor's integrity check, and your attestation chain will show as invalid. You try to submit that to auditors, and they'll nuke your filings on site. Mason muttered something under his breath. It might have been a prayer or profanity. Hard to tell. At 1:17 p.m., compliance pinged legal. The message was short. Contractor attempted forced modification of policy logic. System auto-reported to vendor integrity ledger. Violation logged. This must be resolved before Friday or filings will freeze. Friday. 3 days, and still every path looped back to one person. A name that wasn't in the building, wasn't on the payroll, wasn't even in the damn Slack. Just floating in red letters across every blocked submission form. Fallback signer, ER. Linton Legal was rattled. You could tell by the phrasing of their memos. No more suggest or recommend. They'd escalated to critical, exigent, and regulatory exposure. We're whispering now in offices and stairwells. The phrase governance breach got passed around like a flu. Someone even asked the CFO if firing me had violated any retention clause. The CFO replied she didn't have one. She was just always here. The contractor left around 4 p.m., muttering about vendor lock prisons and embedded governance daisy chains. Mason didn't say goodbye, just sat in his chair, motionless, watching the system screen blink every 30 seconds with a new validation fail. I checked the logs that night. There had been 17 override attempts in the past 48 hours. Every one of them rejected. Every one of them reported. Every one of them ending in the same 2 lines. Tier 1 attestation status. Locked. Fallback signer, ER, Linton. It wasn't sabotage. It was design. I didn't need to break the system. It just made it so I was the only one who could unbreak it. The emergency board meeting was called for 7:30 a.m., which in corporate terms means one thing: everyone's screwed and no one wants to say it first. No catered breakfast, no smiling assistants, no preamble. Just 10 people in varying shades of panic, sipping burnt coffee, and trying not to be the first to ask, how bad is it? The CEO dialed in from some airport lounge, visibly annoyed and already sweating under those decorative wood ceiling tiles. Legal looked like they hadn't slept in days. Mason was in a rumpled blazer that didn't match his pants and had clearly been up all night trying to salvage the unsalvageable. The chair opened the meeting flatly. We need to understand how the hell an off-boarded employee can still hold signing authority over our audit framework. Mason cleared his throat. It's a misconfiguration. Legacy, logic. I'm working with IT to strip it out, no, said legal. Quiet. Final, you're not. The system is rejecting all patch attempts. And now the vendor has notified our auditors that our compliance environment is flagged for protocol inconsistency. A pause, the kind that hurts. Then one of the board members, Cynthia, head of governance, slid her laptop around for everyone to see. I found the policy chain. It's not a bug. It's clause 12E, 2 years ago. It's cycle policy update, marked as operations continuity during transitional events. She turned to Mason, squinting. You signed it. Mason frowned. I don't remember signing, she tapped her screen. July 12th, during the summer leadership retreat in Napa, you signed a stack of protocol updates between sessions. One of them was this. They pulled up the PDF. There it was in black and white, dry language, and under a wave of harmless jargon. In the event of unplanned disruption to compliance leadership, fallback signer ER. Linton shall assume Tier 1 counter-signatory authority. Reassignment requires full board vote and signatory release by fallback. It had a timestamp, a signature, Mason's initials. The room went dead. The CEO's voice came through the speaker, low and sharp. You approved her as a permanent fallback. Why wasn't this flagged before termination? Mason's voice cracked. It was just part of a stack. I thought it was cleanup work. No one explained. Cynthia cut in, eyes locked on him. Elizabeth wrote the policy, Mason. She circulated it. It was reviewed. You didn't read it. He looked down, opened his mouth, closed it. Because the reality was worse than sabotage. This wasn't some rogue former employee breaching the system with backdoors and exploits. This was approved policy. Official. Logged. Signed. Been there the whole time, and not one of them had read it. Someone from finance tried to lighten the blow. But surely we can just revoke it now, call an emergency vote, reassign the signer. Legal stepped in again, voice firm, only with her consent. That's in the clause. Unanimous board approval and signatory release. Another silence. Then someone whispered what they were all thinking. She built herself into the compliant spine. Mason sank back into his chair. Face hollow, hands limp, all that startup bravado drained like battery acid on a rusted circuit board. Because now he understood. He hadn't fired a middle manager. He'd fired the keystone. They thought they were cleaning house. But they'd pulled the load-bearing beam, and now the whole structure was tilting. No one even asked why she did it. No one dared, because deep down they knew it wasn't revenge. It wasn't malice, it was architecture. And now, every approval, every dollar, every report sat frozen behind 5 dry words, typed 2 years ago in a policy PDF. Fallback signer, ER, Linton. The email came at 6:03 a.m. Subject line, request for discussion, signature urgent. It was short. Terse. The kind of language you use when pride's already been swallowed and there's still gravel in your throat. Elizabeth, I'm reaching out on behalf of the board. Require your signatory authorization to release several pending compliance actions. Please advise your availability for private meeting at a location of your choosing. Sincerely, Ann G., Board Chair. No, dear. No small talk, just need and teeth. I waited 6 hours before replying. Not because I was being petty, because I was thinking. Strategically, structurally. By 12:11 p.m., I had a response drafted, reviewed, and sent. Anne, I'm available for a conversation at neutral ground. Recommend Tuesday, 9:00 a.m. Huxley and Finch, private room. Bring decision makers. I won't be returning to my former position. If we're moving forward, it will be with revised terms, oversight architecture, formalized authority, and protections not subject to future consolidations. Respectfully, ER. Linton. Tuesday came fast. Huxley and Finch was one of those places where men in bad marriages took clients to avoid going home. Quiet, off the books. Faux mahogany walls and a waitress who didn't flinch when someone ordered a martini at 9 a.m. I wore gray, neutral, business but unmemorable. A professional ghost. Anne arrived first, followed by 2 board members, and yes, Mason. No laptop this time. Just a legal pad and a face that looked like it hadn't slept since last Wednesday, and extended a hand. Thank you for meeting. I nodded. You're welcome. No one ordered food. I let them talk first. The word miscommunication floated around a lot. So did unexpected consequences and unintended system dependencies. Eventually, Anne got to it. We'd like to request your co-signature on the necessary attestation actions to release filings for this cycle. The audit requires confirmation by Friday. As you know, I folded my hands. I do. A long pause. Leaned forward. What would it take to resolve this? That was the moment. That exact sentence, what would it take, was the shift. Because this wasn't about fixing a system anymore. This was about redefining power. I pulled out a single sheet of paper. Printed, stapled, no flourish. I've drafted proposed terms. Mason squinted. You want your job back? I didn't even look at him. No. The document had 3 points. ER. Linton to be reinstated not as an employee, but as Tier 1 Compliance Oversight Officer, independent, contracted directly by the board. Counter-signatory authority to remain in perpetuity. Can only be revoked by unanimous board vote plus written release by Oversight Officer. All future changes to compliance architecture must be reviewed and signed off by the Oversight Officer. No exceptions. Mason opened his mouth. Anne raised her hand before he could speak. This protects us? She asked. I nodded. More than you know? Because let's be honest, this wasn't about me anymore. This was about structural memory. About systems that survive leadership egos, transitions, and clueless COOs trying to streamline things they don't understand. Anne read the document again. She looked tired, but she also looked relieved. Draft a formal version, she said. We'll vote tonight. I slid the attestation packet across the table. Signed. She flipped through it like it was a holy text, leaf washing over her face with every confirmed line item. Mason stared at the table, unmoving. No one spoke to him, and I stood, smoothed my jacket, collected my pen. I won't be attending board meetings, I said. I won't be in your org chart. I'll just be in your structure. Then I walked out, leaving only a thin trail of policy behind me, and one man still trying to understand how he got chained to a signature he thought he erased. 8:59 a.m. The document landed in Mason's inbox with a single-line subject: Final compliance execution signature required. He was alone in the conference room, door locked, tie off, eyes bloodshot. His assistant had stopped knocking 20 minutes earlier. No one else wanted to be the one in the room when the auditors logged in and found a black screen where an attestation tree should have been. The board had voted 9-0, and his message had been clear: sign the revised control policy, submit the audit clearance, and don't ever mention the word redundancy again. Mason opened the document with shaking hands. 17 pages, mostly templated language, references to audit phases, revised routing chains, and compliance checkpoint acknowledgements. And then, near the top of page 3, the line he couldn't avoid: primary signatory, Mason J. Roth, Chief Operating Officer Tier 1 co-signatory, non-revocable without unanimous board consent, ER. Linton, he stared at it for 10 full seconds, then clicked sign. There was no thunder, no dramatic swell of music, just a soft ping from the system, like a bell tolling somewhere in the background. Attestation chain complete. Tier 1 validation released. Audit status active. The dashboard lit up green for the first time in weeks. Status bars filled. Validation packets deployed. Vendor logs synced. The auditors began their work. No one clapped. No one spoke. Mason exhaled like he'd been holding it in since the day she walked out. Then, out of habit or maybe just denial, he scrolled back through the PDF, a nervous tick, searching for something, maybe a crack, maybe a door out. He reached the footer just to confirm the version and legal ref code. And there it was, small, gray, almost invisible if you weren't looking for it. This document executed under the authority of Tier 1 Compliance Protocol, as revised. Co-signatory oversight, ER, Linton non-removable without unanimous board vote. All future Tier 1 modifications require joint authorization. He reread it 3 times. Joint authorization. Not consult, not notify, not inform, authorize. It sank in, slowly and with finality. Every future attestation, every critical filing, every high-stakes vendor or compliance decision, he could not move without her. Not now, not ever, unless the board reached a unanimous vote and she agreed to step aside. She hadn't taken his power. She'd braided hers into it. She didn't torch the system. She didn't lock him out. She bound herself to the very spine of everything he thought he controlled. Every time he tried to act, her name would be there, quiet. The margins, like a watermark you can't scrub. Not revenge, not even personal, permanent leverage. He sat back in the chair, looked at the clock. 9:01. Somewhere in the building, Anne was already meeting with the auditors. Legal was smiling again. The junior analysts were probably getting bagels. The crisis was over for everyone but him. For him, it had just begun, because the man who thought he could erase her had just used the last of his authority to make her permanent. He didn't fall apart. He didn't scream. He just sat there, quietly, realizing that the system didn't answer to him anymore. It never had. Thanks for joining the fun, you office survivors. Subscribe for more switch-flicking drama. Let's make your former coworkers sweat.